Welcome to this Connection special. I'm Patricia Gras. Most Americans experience some sort of emotional or physical stress, but despite its prevalence in our modern lives, adrenal fatigue caused by stress has generally been ignored or untreated by the medical community. Dr. James Wilson's book, Adrenal Fatigue, the 21st Century Stress Syndrome, tackles a seemingly common problem, particularly in women. When our adrenals fail, we lose our energy, immune resistance, vitality, and our joy of life. Next, what we can do about it. Thank you, Dr. James, for coming to the Connection special.
Well, thank you, Patricia. It's a pleasure to be here.
We appreciate it. Now, you start your book with Erica as an example. Kind of share with me a little bit about her life, because she seems to be a common example for adrenal fatigue.
Well, Erica was involved in the computer industry. She was a highly motivated young woman who was often working late hours and early mornings. She noted that there was actually showers at the place where she worked, so people who worked all night could take showers, and there was beds there to sleep if they needed to. And that tremendous dedication kept her in there. She was tremendously dedicated. And then she got sick. And she got over that, but it took her a while to get over that, a little bit longer than it should have. And then she noticed her energy started to drag, and then she had to push herself. And she started needing to use caffeine and cola beverages to keep going. And she noticed she started craving salty foods or sugary foods. And then she got sick again, and her sicknesses became more frequent, and it took longer to get over it. And then she reached kind of a point of breaking, and it took a lot longer to get over. And then when she finally came, then it took us about 1.5 years to get her well. And she did get better, and we got back to her being able to be a good employee and to be a dedicated person with a different orientation.
Different lifestyle.
Erica's situation is common.
Right. I wanted to start by asking you the basics, like what are adrenals for? I mean, obviously she suffered from adrenal fatigue.
Yes.
Explain to me what adrenals are for and how do we tax them?
Well, the adrenals are two little glands that sit over your kidneys. They make about 50 hormones if you count the intermediates. They're necessary for life. That's been shown for about 130 years or so. And they produce a lot of different hormones. As a matter of fact, hormones that may surprise you. For example, they produce cortisol. A lot of people have heard of cortisol, and people have heard of adrenaline or noradrenaline. It's now called epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's in the very middle of the adrenal gland. But the adrenals, believe it or not, also produce about 40% of the hormones that people normally use as sex hormones. Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So the male and female hormones are also produced by the adrenal gland. Now, the adrenal gland has mainly to do with stress. And so it's to help the body compensate for stress in a long-term way. The short-term stress is mainly by the epinephrine or norepinephrine produced. The longer-term stresses are by cortisol and the other hormones. And so as the stresses continue with people, and the more they continue and the more there are, after a while, a lot of times the adrenal glands just can't keep up with that demand. And they put out as hard as they can, but it just doesn't work. And so the people begin to feel symptoms then. That's really the adrenals trying as hard as they can, but they can't make it. And so they have sugar cravings, because part of cortisol's function is to keep the blood sugar level. And then they start craving salt, because there's another hormone called aldosterone that becomes lower, and people can't keep up the amount of salt they need. They're excreted in the urine, and so they need that salt. And now we're into a really difficult position, because there's a salt-phobic society out there, and people are trying to avoid salt, but a lot of those people actually need salt because their body is wasting it. It's going through their system, and they need that to replace it to keep the sodium-potassium ratio at the 15-to-1 that it should be.
You mentioned some of the signs and symptoms of adrenal fatigue. Fatigue, obviously being tired all the time, you're needing colas and coffee to keep up. What are some of the symptoms that people may be able to recognize that they need to get help?
Good point. One is morning fatigue. That's one of the biggest things. That when they get up, they don't feel rested. They don't feel well rested. Or they feel kind of fuzzy for quite a while after they get up. Then they may not feel awake until they have the second, third cup of coffee. They oftentimes have a low around 10 o'clock. And then they'll feel better after their noon meal a lot of times. Much better. Then they'll have an afternoon low. It can be as little as 45 minutes or 15 minutes. It can be as long as 2 hours. And it can be from 2 to 3. It can be from 3 to 5. Somewhere in the mid-afternoon, that low can be anywhere from just feeling a little lethargic to having to lay down and do something. And then it's very interesting because at around 6 o'clock, it's almost like someone turned a magic button.
A pickup.
And there's a pickup. You feel better than you felt during the rest of the day.
Why is that?
Well, it has to do with the regulation of several different hormones, and they finally come into adjustment about that time. And about 9:30 or so, they'll get sleepy. But if they're a typical type 1, they're going to fight because they're not going to go to bed at 9:30. Nobody goes to bed at 9:30.
Right.
And if they keep pushing themselves, around 11 o'clock, they'll get a second wind. And then all of a sudden, they want to read this, they want to clean the kitchen, they want to do this project. And then at 1 or 1:30 or 2, then they want to go to sleep.
Right.
And if you ask them, they want to sleep in the next morning. And they'll tell you that they get their most refreshing sleep between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning that they can sleep in.
Interesting. Now, it's called hyponatremia, right?
Well, it's had a lot of different names. I gave it the term adrenal fatigue because I thought it was easy to understand it.
Would you say this is something new because we are, as Americans, more stressed than we've ever been, or are we recognizing it more now?
Adrenal fatigue was first diagnosed in 1898.
So it's been there for a while.
1898. So it's been here over 100 years, recognized by a Frenchman named Émile Sargent when he saw there was a group of his patients that didn't recover from the flu like they should have. They took longer to heal, they needed more salt, and they were lethargic. And he followed these people and discovered it was the adrenal glands. And actually there were many articles about low adrenal function that appeared in the Journal of Endocrinology that started in 1917 to about 1925. There are a lot of articles about decreased adrenal function.
You say that about 80% of Americans suffer from this. That seems really high.
At some time in their life or other, actually John Morgenthaler, the author of Smart Drugs, said 80% of North Americans suffer from adrenal fatigue.
That's amazing.
And the other 20% are in denial.
What are the tests that we need? Because I know there are certain tests that don't work to find out if you have adrenal fatigue. So
no, that's
what works?
True. As far as laboratory tests, the best laboratory test is what they call salivary cortisol test. Now, this is a very simple test that's actually people can do at home. They can get it from several labs online and just look up saliva test and see what happens. Saliva test can test all the steroid hormones, so not just cortisol, but DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, estrogen, and they simply put a little saliva in a vial. And with the adrenals, we want 4 times a day to test the cortisol and how it's functioning during different times a day. And so they'll send that through the mail and then get a result back. It's fairly simple to interpret, and it doesn't necessarily need a prescription. If they want insurance to cover it, some insurances cover saliva test. And if we have people that are on Medicare, Part B Medicare covers saliva testing for cortisol.
Why does it go unrecognized by the medical community? You say that it's not being recognized, it's not being diagnosed. Why is that?
It's partly because it's not a nice, neat little package. It takes a little bit of interpretation of the test. A lot of medical doctors, even though the saliva test has been around for over 20 years, they're still not familiar with it. When they do the serum test, the broad ranges that serum tests are designed are so broad, they only pick up the very 2.5% low, and most of those people don't show that have adrenal fatigue. Also in medical school, we're taught that there's only Addison's disease. That's the only low-functioning adrenal. And so you're either normal or you fall off the cliff and have Addison's. Well, nature doesn't work like that. It's a general progression.
Yeah, because you can have moderate adrenal fatigue, low adrenal fatigue.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't have to be acutely sick to have it.
Absolutely.
Is what you're saying. Now, why is it that stress is so damaging to our adrenals? I mean, what can we do about it? How do we tackle stress?
It's so damaging because the adrenal glands are the main glands of stress. They're the major, I call them the master sergeants of stress. They have to do most of the things to help the body compensate by secretion of its hormones and causing all the different adjustments. And they just become overwhelmed.
Is it the fight or flight response? Is that has to do with the adrenals?
That's a little
fight
bit of
or
it.
Flight?
Yeah, that's the acute response. But the chronic ones are just the day-to-day handling. See, people don't realize that a stressor could be an affected toe. It could be a bad tooth. It can be a bad marriage. It can be...
Bad boss?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Bad boss.
Right.
Yeah.
Not my problem, but how do we reduce that stress? Let's talk about stress reduction.
Okay. one of the first things, and there's some instructions in the book that tell you about this, but one of the first things we want to do is look at your lifestyle. I see a tremendous number of people who think it's wrong to have downtime, who think it's not good to have non-dedicated time. So having downtime is an important part. We want to eliminate the things that drive the body. Caffeine, cola beverages, snacks that are filled with things that drive people. We want to give people time to relax. We want to change their food so that they're burning up nutrients like crazy when they're under stress. And we want to put good foods in their system instead of the junk foods. The interesting thing about people with adrenal fatigue is they a lot of times gravitate toward the fast food type of restaurants because they're high salt, high fat, high caffeine places to refuel. And so even though that's not good food and it has its long-term deleterious effects, as we saw from the movie, what was it called? Super Size Me. Yes.
Right.
And many articles, scientific articles, hundreds of scientific articles on detrimental effects of this kind of eating. But for the person with adrenal fatigue, it has that short-term energy with the fat, the refined carbohydrates, and the caffeine.
So do you think the obesity epidemic may have something to do with adrenal fatigue?
Yeah, it has something to do with it.
Because we have the cravings?
And not only that, the blood sugar tends to drop because we don't have enough aldosterone as the adrenal fatigue, and people tend to also overeat in addition to they don't just have that number of calories they need, but in order to satiate the anxiety and the upness, they will overeat to compensate for that, afraid to run out of energy, afraid that it's going to tank them like they felt before.
Share some of the patient stories that you have, people that have dealt with this well.
I have great patient stories because I had great patients. I practiced in this small town in Ontario, 60 miles northwest of Toronto, for a number of years. And so I wasn't the most easy person to get to. So it was wonderful to see these people come out of the woodwork. And I had a many-month waiting list, 7 to 9 month waiting list, and it was for people who wanted to get well because as a naturopathic physician, we tried to look deeper at what was going on and help these people thoroughly recover their health. And so I had one woman, for example, a woman in New York. She had been a stockbroker, a stock analysis, and her job was to fly to 5 countries in 9 days in South America. As she was coming back, she would type her reports, and then she was home for a week, and then she'd fly to Europe and do a similar thing, and flying back, making her all-night reports. She did this for about 2.5 years or so. And then one night on one of the flights, she got something like Legionnaire's
disease,
pneumonia.
Yeah. Right, pneumonia.
And she recovered from that, but she never fully recovered. And so she eventually took a leave of absence because she couldn't continue doing what she had done. And she went to 8 different clinics. She went to Mayo, she went to Bellevue, Mount Sinai. In this woman's case, money was no object, and so she went to the best. And at the end of this, they told her, there's nothing wrong with you. It's all in your head.
I've heard that one before.
So she came to me, and her fiancé flew to Dallas where I was speaking, and he says, I think my fiancé has adrenal fatigue. I want you to come to New York and treat her. I said, I don't think we'll need to do that. Let's just do a telephone consult. And we did, and I worked with a couple of doctors in New York City. And we found that this woman had a badly infected tooth that was cracked, and a root canal had never been taken care of properly, had that taken care of. And then also, in this one woman's case, she actually had an inborn error of metabolism, which is very, very rare, of aldosterone, that hormone I was talking about. We got the right replacement medication for her. And I got a postcard from her that she'd been to 2 bar mitzvahs. She'd been to Europe twice. Now, instead of being up for only 15 minutes a day, this woman was only up 15 minutes per day, and they told her nothing was wrong with her. She was now only resting 15 minutes per day, and she had her life back again.
So, and rest is extremely important when you have adrenal fatigue, right?
Rest and a good quality of rest. Being able to sleep well is one of the keys to recovery.
Since you're talking about women, you also talk about men. Obviously, they suffer from adrenal fatigue just as much as women,
Absolutely.
correct?
Yeah.
But women are affected more, it seems, by hormones. We have more hormonal cycles. And bioidentical hormones, does that affect adrenal fatigue in any way?
It makes it, when the adrenal gland, remember, about 40% of the hormones are produced by the adrenal glands. Okay, so we have what I call soccer moms, women that are going pedal to the metal for 20 years. They're raising their children, and all of a sudden perimenopause starts to hit. the adrenals are already taxed as much as they can be. And then when they start to hit menopause, there's an even greater demand because as the ovaries shut down, the adrenals have to take up that slack and produce the extra estrogen and progesterone as the ovaries are shutting down. There's no room. There's no energy. And so instead of very easily gliding through menopause as it should be, as you find that women in non-traditional cultures or traditional cultures do in undeveloped nations, our women hit a wall. And it's because the adrenals are a big part of that problem. They're already taxed. And when you go into menopause or perimenopause and ask for more out of a gland that's already functioning as much as it can, then they start going downhill. So in this case, what you were talking about with perimenopause and menopausal and the hormonal regulations, oftentimes using bioidentical hormones, at least in the short term, to help support this, helps take some of the load off the adrenal glands. And then as we use the right dietary supplements to get the adrenal glands strengthened once more, then many times after we get the adrenals strong again, they no longer need the bioidentical hormones, or if they do, they only need a very small amount of them.
That's very interesting because bioidentical hormones, a lot of women are taking those, or synthetic hormones, which synthetic hormones do more damage to the adrenals, right?
Especially the progestins. The synthetic progesterones. Now, progesterone is a very natural hormone that's it's available in health food stores and pharmacies. It's made from a yam, actually. And that's identical to what your body makes. But these progestins that are like progesterone, but they have side chains on them from a steroid hormone, they're not the same. And as a matter of fact, when you look into the literature deeply, you find that the progestins cause a lot of the side effects that the hormone replacement are dealing with, the people with hormone replacement are dealing with.
I think, go ahead, sorry.
Well, and it creates a lot of dilemma because the women don't realize that there's a natural way that they can replace the bioidentical hormones. They're getting a bad name by the press, and which is really driven by the pharmaceutical industry, because when the Women's Health Initiative came out and the adverse effects were shown, then Wyeth, the manufacturer of that, both of those hormones that were used in that suffered tremendous profit loss. And so they fought back by, my understanding is they fought back by trying to make a smear campaign on natural hormones, identical hormones. And I find tremendous benefits from the natural hormones. And when they're balanced correctly, especially when adrenal health is involved, as they work together, both doctors and compounding pharmacists, nurse practitioners, naturopaths work to give these people the balance they need, and their life is remade for them.
Now, we've talked about stress reduction, we've talked about diet. I assume it's organic food, whole foods that you want to eat, not processed foods.
Good quality.
What do you treat them with besides that? With diet, stress, obviously lifestyle changes. Mm-hmm. Do you use supplements for that? Are there special supplements to get your adrenals back in shape?
Yes, there are. And what I found is that there's one of the most critical is a multiglandular. We call them multiglandular. These are glands of the adrenals, the hypothalamus, pituitary, gonadal, and thyroid that don't have the hormones in them, but they seem to provide the raw material to help the gland actually heal. Now, use of glandulars have gone back once again. In 1896, there was a company you may have heard of called Burroughs Wellcome that had glandular extracts. And most all the pharmaceutical companies used to have their own glandular extracts. And since the invention of the synthetic steroid hormones, they no longer produce them. But there's a few companies that still produce glandular extracts. And I found those to be the most important key to a total health reestablishment for adrenal fatigue. In other words, you can make people feel better, but that's not the same as healing. To really heal them to where they don't actually need supplements anymore or any other drugs, I found that has been one of the keys.
So not only can you feel better if you heal your adrenals, but also you could lose weight automatically, right?
Oh, it just happens.
Because it just automatically happens.
Yeah, if that's the cause, if the reason for your weight gain is the adrenals underfunctioning or overfunctioning, once you establish balance in the adrenals, the weight just gradually comes off.
Can you get to the point that your adrenals have been taxed so much that there's no return, there's no point of return? You cannot heal them anymore because they have been taxed to the point it's an acute stage, which I assume is Addison's disease.
Addison's disease, about 2/3 of Addison's patients are autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, can you explain what it is, Addison's disease?
Yeah, basically, Addison's disease is when the adrenal glands are in a state of near failure or failure.
Okay.
So there's very little output, as opposed to adrenal fatigue that it isn't as severe.
As severe, yeah.
Now, about 2/3 of Addison's disease, which has an incidence of about 1 in 23,000, is a result of what we call an autoimmune function. So the adrenal glands get attacked by the body, and so there's scar tissue, there's damage that's done to the adrenal glands. Most of those people I haven't found to be able to recover, but there's about 1/3 of those we call idiopathic, which means we basically don't know what caused it. And of those people that suffer that, I've seen some of those people recover by using dietary supplements and sometimes replacing there's a drug called hydrocortisone that has several different brand names.
Right.
And that's the natural drug that's cortisol. And if we replace that, and so the body has its own, makes a tiny bit of cortisol, but we replace what it needs with people with Addison's, then they can live a normal life. And I found if you use the dietary supplement, the multiglandular I was talking about, then over time, I've known a number of people that actually recover from that, as long as there wasn't that much destruction to the adrenal gland. So the only times I found that people actually can't recover has been in those cases of Addison's disease where the autoimmune process has damaged the adrenal gland enough to where it can't come back.
And then those people end up in bed, basically.
Well, no, they're actually, they use cortisol as a replacement,
right,
they can live somewhat of a normal life.
Yeah. You've studied, you have 3 PhDs, 2 master's degrees, you're a perpetual student.
Yes.
Explain to me, you're a doctor of naturopathy.
Right.
Explain to me what that is, and do you see that as a trend in the future? Because it's more geared towards preventive medicine as opposed to treatment.
It is. It's both prevention and treatment. A doctor in naturopathic medicine studies the natural causes and treatment of things, so that where his emphasis, his training is basically deep into the basic sciences, and so there's a lot of biochemistry, a lot of physiology, anatomy, histology to understand how the body works. And so, as a naturopathic physician, and if I had you come in to me as a patient with a headache, I would wonder, what is that headache for? Instead of writing your script, okay, here's something to take away your headache, I would use that symptom as a guiding light as to what else is going on. Is this a headache being caused by one thing in the body or another thing in the body? Is it become a lack of oxygen? Is it coming from the neck? Is it coming from another organ or gland? How can we help this person with a headache so that not only the headache goes away, but this person is in a healthier state?
Right.
And so we try to work with causes a lot more than the typical medical doctor would be. We're also open to a lot of therapies that the medical doctor isn't. It's a very interesting thing to me that all the different therapies open in the world to treat people, that medical doctors only use drugs, radiation, and chemotherapy. And of course, if there's now just surgeons do surgery, just radiologists do radiation or people doing chemotherapy. So we only have drugs as the only therapy that most medical doctors use to a great deal. Well, there's over 100 different modalities that are available, and luckily naturopaths are taught most of these, so they can use diet and exercise, but they can use tiny remedies called homeopathic remedies. Yeah,
yes.
They can use glandular extracts. They can use vitamins and minerals, lifestyle, exercises, actually even water, hydrotherapy. So there's a number of different things that they can use, but the main thing isn't what they use. It's their orientation. What these symptoms show me that the body is really trying to say that I can do something to correct.
You know, I was wondering how you decided to, because you wrote, so this is pretty much the book on adrenal fatigue in America today.
Yes.
Why did you decide to, you could have written a book about so many other problems out there, health problems, but you chose this one. Why is that?
I think it was because of my patients. I saw, as I got a longer and longer waiting list, I started asking how many doctors these people had been to. And I was finding people that were coming to me that had been to 20, 25 doctors.
You were the doctor of last resort.
I was the doctor of last resort. And I couldn't believe, with what I saw so simple, why they would have to go to 20 to 25 doctors. They should have gotten on the first one. And I said, something has to be done to get the message out to these people. My first inclination was to write the definitive medical text about adrenal dysfunction in a clinical setting. Right. And I was talking to Jonathan Wright, my friend that wrote the foreword to the book, and he said, so who's going to read it? Says medical doctors aren't going to read it. They don't care about it. They don't believe in it. Why don't you write it for the people that mean the most to you? And I said, my patients? He goes, write it for your patients. So I redesigned the entire book and wrote it at an 8th grade level because I realized there weren't nearly as many doctors as were needed to treat this symptom. It was pervasive throughout our society. It needed to be addressed because it was the underlying factor in so many people's health. And we had, and so that's what I gave the orientation to the book.
Thank you so much. Sorry, we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much. And that's our show for tonight. I'd like to thank Dr. James Wilson for joining us. And for more information on adrenal fatigue, you can visit adrenalfatigue.org. Don't forget, we're always interested in what you have to say. So if you have a question or comment about the show, call us at 713-743-8513 or send us an email at theconnection@houstonpbs.org. And don't forget, you can always find out about The Connection by going to our website at houstonpbs.org. And that's our show for tonight. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.